Hello everybody and welcome back to another exclusive video for Novos. Today I'm going to be taking you through all 12 new POIs in the new chapter and ranking them from best to worst. Now I've done the research, I've played a few games of the season, I've done some analysis on the medal, on the loot, on how quickly it takes to loot, and this is my comprehensive list after a few days of the new chapter are the best spots to land at. Now obviously splits are also going to be very vital in duos, so we're not going to be focusing on any splits. We'll talk about the splits later as I figure them out, but the POIs, those are pretty clear, so let's get into it. So let's start off with the best POIs for this season. Now, the POIs for this season are very even. I feel like they're pretty much all at least decent. We don't have any very bad POIs, you know, like a Holly like last season, for example. But there are some very clear winners and some very clear losers. And there's only 4 that I believe are top tier. So here are my top 4 top tier drop spots for the season. My top 4 top tier drop spots for the season are Condo Canyon, Sleepy Sound, Logjam Lumberyard, and Coney Crossroads. So let's talk about Condo Canyon. Now Condo Canyon is, I feel like, akin to a Sweaty Sands of last season, for example. It is just massive, and with the size means that there is just a insane amount of loot inside of this drop spot. You just have so much area, which means there's going to be a lot of floor spawns. There's every single type of mat. You can get a decent amount of metal, brick, and wood pretty quickly in this drop spot, and you have cars that are readily available for rotates as well. To your south, you also have the vault location where you can use a rift if you want to late rotate, so there's a bunch of options there from this drop spot itself. I think this drop spot is just very good just because it's just so big. It's going to be tough and very slow to loot, but in terms of the size and the loot availability, there's just nothing close to it. I think in this season, this is just the biggest drop spot on the map. The second drop I want to talk about is Sleepy Sound. Now this one I think is very comparable to a Misty Meadows of last season. You obviously have your north side and then your south side covered by water, and on the north side you have, I think, a little bit less loot compared to the south side, but both of them are very valid in terms of drop spots. The POI as a whole is then very big and massive. You have a lot of fishing spots in the middle, so there is a ton of loot here. It is very difficult to loot though, because there's a bunch of houses and very small areas to loot at a time, so you need to be very thorough in order to find launch pads and finding all those floor spawns, which means it's going to take a long time to learn and experience it. And I think even if you are very experienced, it's going to take a long time for you to loot it anyway, so you need to be only focusing on either north side or south side in order to loot it. In terms of rotations, I feel like you have pretty isolated rotations. Shifty Shafts has an easy rotation to the south, so you have a very easy rotate straight towards Coney Crossroads, and that should be pretty easy in terms of a competitive perspective. You also have a massive mountain to your bottom left that you could use for surge. It is very tough though to get there before Shifty Shafts, but maybe you could WQ Shifty Shafts if you want to. The third spot is Logjam Lumberyard. Now this is probably one of the best spots I've seen so far on the map. It is the quickest match you can get possible. There is a bunch of wooden pallets all around the drop spot, and then you have just an insane availability for metal. There's a lot of loot. This area covers a massive area as well, and it is just very solid. You have easy metal, a lot of chests, and the quickest match on the map. This makes it one of the top spots for this season for duos. Last but not least, Coney Crossroads I think is very good as well. It is basically a smaller version of Condo Canyon, but with a more compact looting path, and that makes it pretty good, right? Because you're able to loot very quickly. You have the availability of match. You're pretty central in zone as well, and anywhere to your south, there's basically nothing. There's not a drop spot. There's no POIs, so you have easy rotations towards the middle map mountains to your south. So that means that you have easy rotations. You have very quick looting abilities, and this just makes it a very good spot. It's very solid, nothing too crazy about it, but good availability of mats and good positioning make it one of the top tier spots in my opinion. Now let's go down to one tier below to the good tier. Now these are drop spots I think are, you know, pretty good. Not as good as the top tier drop spots, but these guys are solid and they're going to get you what you need in terms of loot and materials. Now Greasy Groves and Rocky Rios I feel like are 2 of the decent drop spots for this map. Greasy Grove, I think it's very comparable to a Rito Row, for example. You have, you know, solid loot, south side of the map. You have, it's a bit edge as well. It's basically opposite of Rito Row, which was on the bottom right. This one's on the bottom left. So I feel like it's basically the same drop spot. You have a decent amount of pepper spawns as well in terms of non-boxes, and you have solid metal. So it has a lack of loot. I don't think it's that lacking. I think it's okay, but you're definitely nothing comparable to a other drop spot like Coney Canyon or Logjam Lumberyard in terms of efficiency. So that makes it a solid, good spot. Rocky Rios, I think, is very similar to that as well. You have a decent central positioning, basically the same rotates as Greasy Grove. You're lacking a bit of metal, I feel like, in this drop spot. It's going to be a little bit tough, but you do have bridges nearby that you could farm. But, you know, it is just a solid spot, nothing too crazy. It's just mediocre, which makes it just good because it is just a solid spot. You're not going to be struggling from there at all. Now, Shifty Shafts is also one of those middling spots that are pretty good. It is very tough to fight the main part of it on the south side, but inside of the mountain, for those of you that don't know, there is a massive cavern area where there is a ton of loot inside. However, this is one of those spots that takes ages to loot, and if you're taking a long time to loot, that's obviously bad in a competitive sense. So that makes it a middling spot. Even though there's a lot of loot there, it's just too slow to loot out for a competitive drop spot. So I personally would recommend land there, especially in a cash cup area where, you know, you're going to be fighting in the open spots of Shifty Shafts, not going to be able to build, and also trying to fight in those caverns is going to be a nightmare. In terms of the middling drop spot, I think Camp Cuddle and Chonker Speedways are one of those middling drop spots. Not too bad. They're not a drop spot that I would personally land at if I was a pro player. Camp Cuddle is a lot of loot, so it is a massive area, but there's barely any metal that I could find there. You have an okay amount of metal in some of the parts of the drop spot, but you don't have as much as you want, and it takes a long time to loot it as well. So that makes it a middling drop spot for me. It's also very difficult to loot. There's a bunch of houses. It's very spread out. I think it's very tough to get an efficient loot path going from there. For Chonker Speedway, I think this is just a massive area. I feel like you have no loot over there. You obviously have the availability of quick cars with big wheels, which is very good for you in terms of rotations, but you do have rifts to your bottom right, so it doesn't really matter in that sense. So the metal there is okay, but I feel like there's just barely any loot there. And if you want to find the loot, you have to go towards the outskirts of the speedway, and that takes a long time. So your looting path is slow. You're gonna have, you know, a lack of loot, and also just a lack of trees as well. I don't think there's that much wood either, so that makes it a middling drop spot. Not the best, not the worst. It's okay. And here are my lower drop spots. It is the Joneses, Sanctuary, and the Daily Bugle. Now, obviously, these are opinionated, and you might like these drop spots, and I might be missing something, but I feel like from landing these spots a few times, I just don't get it. You know, the Joneses is just a massive wooden area with barely any loot. It's very tough to find the loot as well because you're covered by trees, which means your looting path is very, very slow, and you're going to be missing a lot of floor spawns. So that makes it very lower tiered in my opinion. In terms of the Sanctuary does have henchman chests, but that doesn't really make it worthwhile. The meadow there is okay, but again, it is just a very awkward spot to land at, and if you're going to be contested there, there's lots of areas where you just can't build, so it's a very tough spot to learn. And in terms of rotations, it's okay, but I prefer some of the other drop spots compared to the Sanctuary. The Daily Bugle, just in of itself, is very similar to Shifty Shafts. It's very tough to fight because inside of the buildings you can't even build. There's a bunch of spider webs all around you, so you're going to be struggling to jump around and loot it quickly because you're going to be bounced away on the spider webs. In terms of the loot itself, there is a lot of floor spawns here, I feel like, but because of the elevation and the amount of buildings that there are inside of this drop spot, you're going to be struggling to find all of the loot as well, so that makes it very tough. You do have the sunny steps to your northeast, but that's going to be a separate drop spot, not inside of the POI of the Daily Bugle, so that makes it probably, in my opinion, one of the worst drop spots, and I had a nightmare landing there in arena because it's just too difficult to fight and to find loot. So those are the 12 POIs, pretty much all explained. If you guys have a different opinion, make sure you comment it below or let us know. And if you want other exclusive videos like this one, check out novos.gg for all of your training needs. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!